we've got lives and I've got children, and the effort that we put in, because we work really hard.
For decades, fans have adored the image of the Beatles as four inseparable friends who changed the world with their music. But behind the dazzling smiles and unforgettable melodies, tension brewed. And none was more surprising than the quiet storm between drummer Ringo Starr and the band's polished perfectionist, Paul McCartney. Ringo, the easygoing joker of the group, eventually reached his breaking point. So, does Ringo Starr truly dislike Paul McCartney? Join us as we uncover the silent rift between Ringo Starr and Paul McCartney. Ringo and Paul conflict. Building on the tensions already seen in Paul McCartney's story, it's fascinating to realize how even the kindest and most easygoing people can get caught up in serious conflict. Ringo Starr, often remembered as the friendly, good-natured heart of the Beatles, was not spared from the emotional storm that tore the band apart. Beneath his calm surface, there were moments of frustration, anger, and heartbreak that surprised even those who knew him best. Ringo had always been seen as the group's peacekeeper, the steady hand who avoided taking sides while John, Paul, and George clashed over music, money, and management. But that didn't mean he stood untouched by the tension. He felt it deeply. The strain of watching the band crumble was heavy, and on at least one occasion, it all boiled over into a heated confrontation, one that would leave a lasting mark on both his memory and his music. This unforgettable moment unfolded during the painful process of the Beatles' breakup in the late 1960s and early 1970s, when the four men were trying to untangle their partnership. In the middle of those tense negotiations, Ringo went to visit Paul, probably hoping to calm things down and keep communication open. But instead of peace, he walked into a storm. According to Paul's own recollection, Ringo came to see me. I think he was sent, being the mild-mannered nice guy, by the others because of the dispute. So Ringo arrived at the house, and I must say, I gave him a bit of verbal. I said, "You guys are just messing me around." He said, "No, well, on behalf of the board and on behalf of the Beatles, we think you should do this." Paul's words paint a scene filled with exhaustion and frustration. Two friends on opposite sides of a crumbling empire, speaking past each other after months of tension. He later admitted it was the only time he ever told someone to get out, calling it a fairly hostile exchange and noting that things had reached a dangerous edge. Ringo's memory of that same encounter shows the story from a different angle, one just as vivid, maybe even more intense. "I went to see Paul," Ringo later recalled. "To my dismay, he went completely out of control, shouting at me, poking his fingers toward my face, saying, 'I'll finish you now, you'll pay.' Then he told me to put my coat on and get out. I did so. It was a painful, humiliating moment. For Ringo, who had always tried to stay neutral and kind, it must have cut deeply. That raw exchange revealed that even the nice one of the Beatles could be drawn into the emotional battlefield. It showed that behind the smiles and charm was a man who could feel hurt, betrayed, and pushed too far. What makes this episode so remarkable isn't just that tempers flared, because they all lost their tempers at one point or another, but that Ringo, of all people, chose to respond in a way that only a true musician could. He turned that moment of bitterness into a song. In his solo career after the Beatles split, he slipped a subtle but unmistakable jab at Paul into his lyrics, a musical echo of that painful day. But what other conflicts did Paul get involved? Let's find out. McCartney's heated disputes and controversies. The story of Paul McCartney is often told through his beautiful melodies, his endless success, and his incredible ability to stay relevant through the years. But no career as long and legendary as his ever happens without deep struggles. Behind all the fame, there were moments of heartbreak, conflict, and painful choices that changed his life forever. After decades of being adored by fans all over the world, McCartney found himself at the center of several serious disputes, legal, personal, and artistic. The biggest turning point came in the year 1970 when he made a decision that officially ended one of the greatest eras in music history. Although the Beatles had already been growing apart because of creative disagreements, money problems, and increasing personal distance, it was McCartney who finally took the formal step that ended it all. He filed a lawsuit to dissolve the band's business partnership, accusing their manager, Alan Klein, of mishandling their finances. To millions of fans, that single act made McCartney the man who broke up the Beatles. It became a label that followed him for years. Yet McCartney always insisted he did it to protect the band's money and legacy from a manager he believed could not be trusted. At the time, John Lennon and George Harrison sided with Klein and publicly painted McCartney as difficult and defiant. But within a few years, they too parted ways with Klein, realizing he wasn't as reliable as they once believed. By then, however, the damage had been done. McCartney had already taken most of the blame. He later admitted that the lawsuit was not only exhausting, but also deeply painful, leaving him isolated from the people who had once been his closest friends. In later interviews, he confessed that ending the Beatles in a courtroom felt like tearing apart a family. But he also said that doing nothing would have been far worse. As he moved into his solo years, another side of McCartney began to appear, a side that had always been hidden beneath his charm and musical talent. His rebellious streak started to show. His use of substance, once a quiet personal habit, began drawing public attention. Throughout the 1970s, McCartney was arrested several times for substance possession. But things changed dramatically in 1980 when McCartney flew to Japan for a Wings tour. At the airport, he was caught with nearly half a pound of cannabis in his luggage. The incident made international headlines. Fans around the world were stunned that their gentle, peace-loving idol was suddenly behind bars. Years later, McCartney admitted that his carefree attitude toward substance had been irresponsible, especially since he was a role model to millions. Though the public eventually forgave him, the 2000s brought a very different kind of challenge, one far more personal and painful. In the year 2002, McCartney married Heather Mills, a former model and activist. After the death of his beloved first wife, Linda, the marriage was seen as a beautiful second chance at love. For a while, McCartney and Mills seemed inseparable, attending events together and speaking fondly of one another. But after only 6 years, the marriage fell apart, and the divorce became one of the most dramatic celebrity scandals of the decade. Mills accused McCartney of emotional and even physical abuse, accusations he strongly denied. The court found no proof of her claims, but the damage to his public image was already done. The legal battle was ugly, full of leaked stories, public arguments, and endless headlines. In the end, McCartney was ordered to pay a large financial settlement. Still, public sympathy stayed mostly with him. Many saw Mills as manipulative and attention-seeking because of her frequent media appearances, while McCartney's calm and dignified silence won him respect. But the ordeal revealed a more vulnerable side of him, a reminder that even the most beloved icons are not immune to pain, scandal, and heartbreak. Despite everything, McCartney never stopped defending his artistic legacy. One of his longest and most personal battles has been over songwriting credit. During the Beatles years, every song written by John Lennon and Paul McCartney was credited as Lennon-McCartney, no matter who had done most of the work. It was an agreement made when they were young and inseparable, when friendship mattered more than credit. But after Lennon's death, things became more complicated. McCartney wanted songs he had mainly written, such as Yesterday and Hey Jude, to be listed as McCartney-Lennon. Some people saw this as a fair move after decades of shared recognition, but others accused him of trying to rewrite history. Lennon's estate refused to change the credits, insisting that the original format was part of the Beatles' identity. Beatles purists argued that changing it would distort history and damage the myth of the Lennon-McCartney partnership. For McCartney, however, it wasn't about ego. It was about honesty and fairness. For his critics, it was an unnecessary attempt to prove superiority. Perhaps the most revealing conflict of all, though, came much earlier, in the Beatles' final years. During the late 1960s, tension in the studio reached its peak, McCartney was often accused of becoming too controlling. During the recording of Let It Be and Abbey Road, George Harrison grew frustrated with McCartney's perfectionism and his habit of directing every detail. Footage from those sessions later showed McCartney instructing his bandmates, sometimes sounding irritated as he tried to keep things together. To some, he was the only one still trying to hold the Beatles afloat as they fell apart. To others, he had stopped being a collaborator and turned into a taskmaster. Even Ringo Starr, usually the quiet peacemaker, admitted that McCartney could be difficult in the studio at times. There were moments when McCartney seemed less like a friend and more like a commander, pushing the group forward while their relationships quietly crumbled behind the music. Yet, without that same drive, many of the Beatles' most timeless masterpieces might never have been finished. His determination turned what could have been chaotic final sessions into polished, unforgettable farewells. Would Ringo have become famous at all if not for that life-changing decision in 1962 when he joined the Beatles? Let's take a look. Ringo Starr's journey to fame. For many years, fans and critics have argued about whether Ringo Starr truly deserves to stand beside his legendary Beatles bandmates, or if he was simply lucky to be part of history's most famous band. Some people believe his fame was more about timing and good fortune than talent, while others insist that his charm, resilience, and hard work earned him every bit of success. But few people stop to think about what shaped him before the fame, before the noise, the flashing cameras, and the screaming crowds. Long before he was a star, Ringo Starr, born Richard Starkey on July 17, 1940 in Liverpool, England, was a fragile child fighting to survive. His early life was marked not by opportunity, but by illness. He suffered from serious medical problems, including peritonitis and tuberculosis, which kept him confined to hospital beds for months and even years at a time. By the late 1950s, he was no longer drumming just for himself. He joined the Eddie Clayton Skiffle Group, one of many young bands in Liverpool inspired by the skiffle craze sweeping Britain. Skiffle music was raw, joyful, and energetic, perfect for a young man eager to make noise after years of illness. On stage, Ringo found what he had been missing: connection, excitement, and freedom. His easy smile and steady beat made him stand out. Before long, he took a major step forward, joining Rory Storm and the Hurricanes, one of the most popular live bands in Liverpool. With them, Ringo became a regular performer in local clubs and even abroad in Hamburg, Germany. Night after night, he sharpened his timing, learned how to read a crowd, and earned a reputation as one of the most dependable drummers in the city, all without formal lessons or privilege. Then came the moment that changed everything. In August 1962, he was invited to replace Pete Best as the drummer for the Beatles. The choice was controversial at first, and some fans protested loudly. But inside the band, it quickly became clear that Ringo was the missing piece. His steady, inventive drumming helped shape the group's early hits: Love Me Do, She Loves You, and I Want to Hold Your Hand. While the world focused on Lennon and McCartney's songwriting, Ringo provided the rhythmic backbone that held it all together. His style was never showy, but it was distinct, reliable, creative, and full of personality. Beyond the drums, Ringo's humor and warmth made him beloved by both fans and his bandmates. In recording sessions, he often broke the tension with jokes, and in interviews, he was the one who made people laugh. He wasn't just the drummer in the background. He stepped into the spotlight, singing lead on memorable songs like Yellow Submarine, With a Little Help from My Friends, and Act Naturally. His friendly, down-to-earth voice gave him a special bond with fans who saw him as the most approachable Beatle. He also shone on screen, starring in Beatles films like A Hard Day's Night and Help, where his natural comic timing made him a favorite among audiences. But even golden eras must end. In 1970, the Beatles broke up, and Ringo suddenly faced the challenge of building a career on his own. He didn't hesitate. That same year, he released his first solo album, Sentimental Journey, proving that he had no intention of fading away. The 1970s became a strong decade for him, bringing solo hits like It Don't Come Easy, Photograph, and You're 16, which showed that he could succeed under his own name. He also ventured into acting, appearing in films such as Caveman and The Magic Christian, and continued to reinvent himself as an entertainer. What challenges did Ringo Starr encounter? Let's take a closer look. Ringo Starr, life struggle. Behind the public persona, Ringo Starr faced some intense personal battles, the most significant being his struggle with alcoholism. This challenge affected not only his private life, but also his professional path, creating moments of instability and uncertainty. Despite these difficulties, he found a source of stability that would transform his personal life. In 1981, he married actress Barbara Bach after meeting her on the set of the movie Caveman. Their union became a turning point, grounding him during periods when his career momentum faltered and providing a steady anchor amid the turbulence of fame. The 1980s were a difficult decade in many ways, but they also laid the foundation for a new chapter in his career. In 1989, Ringo reinvented himself publicly by creating the All-Star Band, a live performance group that featured a rotating lineup of well-known musicians. Rather than competing with his peers, he chose to collaborate, sharing the stage with artists from a variety of musical backgrounds. Recognition for his contributions to music began to mount steadily. In 1988, he was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame as a member of the Beatles, a nod to the groundbreaking work he had accomplished with the legendary band. Decades later, in 2015, he received a second induction, this time as a solo artist, proving that his individual achievements were worthy of acknowledgement on their own. Further honors followed. In 2018, Ringo received one of the United Kingdom's highest distinctions when he was knighted, officially becoming Sir Richard Starkey. The moment carried deep symbolism, marking the journey of a man who had risen from hospital beds and personal hardships to stages seen by millions around the world. His long battle with alcoholism, which spanned much of the late 1970s and 1980s, left an indelible mark on his life. While his professional career occasionally showed signs of waning, the real turbulence often occurred behind the scenes. In later years, Ringo candidly admitted that alcohol had dominated his life, clouded his judgment, and destabilized his sense of self. What had once been an escape had turned into a weight he could no longer ignore. The turning point came in 1988 when he and Barbara Bach made the courageous decision to enter rehab together. But how does the public see Ringo? Let's find out. Ringo Starr's public image. Critics often said Ringo Starr had forgotten the very fans and people who helped him build his fame, and this incident quickly became an example of how a single comment or gesture could instantly change public opinion. Instead of being seen as a seasoned musician valuing his time, he was, for a moment, viewed as someone indifferent to gratitude. The controversy revealed just how quickly admiration from the public could turn into disappointment, proving that long-lasting fame requires careful words and actions. Even someone with decades of goodwill could face criticism if their behavior or statements did not match public expectations. Beyond personal controversies, Ringo's involvement in business disputes also shaped his public image, especially during the rocky period when the Beatles were breaking up. While he wasn't always at the center of legal battles, he was often caught up indirectly in conflicts over the band's business, particularly involving their former manager, Alan Klein. The Beatles' breakup wasn't just an emotional experience. It was entangled in contracts and legal battles that put pressure on friendships already weakened by creative differences. For Ringo, navigating these disputes meant balancing loyalty with practicality. Many times he had to accept decisions that weren't his preference or choose sides in ways that tested his relationships. Even though he wasn't the loudest voice in courtrooms or the media, his participation linked him to controversies that went beyond music, touching on corporate and financial conflicts. These challenges added complexity to his legacy, showing him not just as a drummer and performer, but as someone reluctantly involved in one of the most famous splits in music history. Even beyond legal and business disputes, Ringo faced skepticism about his memories of the Beatles' story. Over the years, as documentaries, interviews, and retrospectives revisited the band's history, his recollections sometimes changed depending on the setting or audience. Some historians and commentators criticized him for giving inconsistent accounts of key events. At times, people accused him of exaggerating or downplaying stories to fit his media appearances, raising questions about whether he was consciously shaping his legacy or simply recalling memories that had naturally altered over time. Human memory is imperfect, especially when shared with others, but in Ringo's case, even small inconsistencies were magnified by public scrutiny. The question became whether he was protecting personal truth or subtly rewriting history to fit a preferred story. These criticisms highlighted the ongoing tension between individual memory and collective history. When someone is part of a cultural legend, every word is weighed carefully against documented facts. For Ringo, the challenge wasn't dishonesty. It was trying to be both storyteller and character in a story millions feel they own. So, what do you think about Ringo Starr and Paul McCartney's hidden jabs? Share your thoughts with us in the comments section. Don't forget to like and subscribe.